Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of his ship and watched the screen with worry in his eyes. The messages kept coming from all over the galaxy, but they were getting weaker and fewer each hour. He had been a ship captain for 15 years, but he had never seen anything like this before. The aliens who ruled the galaxy were disappearing one by one, and nobody knew why. Amy Brooks sat at her station and listened to the radio signals from space. Her job was to talk to other ships and planets, but now there was almost nothing to hear. The big alien empires that had been sending messages for hundreds of years were going quiet. First, the crystal people from the Zephyr world stopped talking. Then the blue warriors from the Karathi space went silent. Even the strange ghost aliens who lived in computers had stopped sending their weird signals. Lisa Hayes walked over to Jake and showed him her tablet. The numbers on it made his stomach feel sick. Every day more alien worlds went dark on their maps. The galaxy that had been full of different voices was becoming empty and quiet. She had been his second in command for 5 years, and she had never seen him look so worried before. The humans had only joined the big alien club 50 years ago. Most of the other species had been flying around space for thousands of years before Earth even learned how to build rockets. The aliens had always treated humans like children who did not know much about the universe. When humans tried to warn them about dangers, the aliens would just laugh and say humans were too young to understand. Dr. Ryan Carter was looking at his computer files about alien biology. 3 months ago, he had found strange energy readings coming from the edge of the galaxy. The readings did not match anything in their science books. When he told the alien leaders about it, they said humans were just being scared of nothing. They said the older species would handle any real problems. Amy suddenly sat up straight in her chair and pointed at her screen. A new message was coming through the static, and it was from someone very important. Admiral Vextar was the leader of all alien military forces. His people had been keeping peace in the galaxy for over 1,000 years. If he was calling for help, then things were very bad. The blue alien appeared on their main screen. His face looked scared and his voice was shaking. Jake had met him before, and Vextar was always calm and confident. Seeing him afraid made everyone on the bridge feel cold inside. The Admiral started talking fast like he did not have much time left. Vextar said that something called the Silence was taking over every alien race. It moved faster than their best ships, and nothing could stop it. He told any humans who heard his message to stay away and not try to rescue anyone. He said the humans had been smart to keep to themselves and not get too close to alien space. Then his voice got cut off and there was only static left. Lisa checked all their sensors and computers. The long-range equipment that could see far into space showed nothing moving out there. All the busy trade routes that used to be full of alien ships were empty. The big space stations where different species would meet and trade were dark and silent. It was like someone had turned off the lights on the entire galaxy except for human space. Ryan pulled up his research files and showed them to Jake. The Kiao, strange energy readings he had found were getting stronger and moving toward human worlds. Whatever the Silence was, it seemed to be heading their way next. His computers showed that it had already reached places that were only a few weeks' travel from Earth. The thing that had destroyed ancient alien civilizations was coming for humanity. Jake made the decision that would change everything for the human race. He ordered his crew to turn the ship around and fly back to Earth as fast as they could. They needed to warn everyone about what was coming. The humans were now alone in a galaxy that had gone quiet, and they had to figure out how to survive. The trip back to Earth took 2 weeks. During that time, more alien worlds stopped sending signals. Amy tried to contact every human ship and colony to tell them what was happening. Some people did not believe the news at first. How could all the powerful alien empires just disappear so quickly? But the evidence was clear on every computer screen and radio receiver. When they finally reached Earth, Jake sent his report to the planetary government. The leaders would have to decide what to do next. Humanity had always been the youngest and weakest species in the galaxy. Now they were the only ones left who were still free. The question was whether they could stay that way when the thing that had destroyed everyone else came for them. The ship landed at the main spaceport, and Jake walked out feeling the weight of the whole galaxy on his shoulders. Earth looked the same as always with its blue sky and white clouds, but everything had changed. Somewhere out in the dark of space, something was coming that had already won against enemies much stronger than humans. The galaxy had fallen silent, and humanity was about to find out if they could survive being the last voices left alive in the endless night of space. Helen Parker stood in front of the biggest meeting room on Earth. People from every human world had come to hear what she had to say. The room was full of soldiers, scientists, and leaders who all looked scared and confused. She had been president for 3 years, but nothing had prepared her for this moment. Telling people that they were alone in the universe was not something any leader ever wanted to do. The big screen behind her showed a map of the galaxy. Most of it was colored red, which meant those areas had gone silent. Only a small blue section around Earth still showed any signs of life. The map made it clear just how bad things were. Billions of aliens who had lived for thousands of years were gone, and humans were the only ones left. General Marcus Stone walked up to speak next. He was in charge of all human military forces, and his job was to keep Earth safe. His ships had been sent out to check on the alien worlds that had stopped talking. What they found there made even the bravest soldiers feel sick with fear. The alien cities were still there, but they were empty. No bodies, no signs of fighting, just silence everywhere they looked. Marcus showed pictures from 12 different worlds his ships had visited. Each one was the same. The buildings were perfect and the machines still worked, but there were no people anywhere. It was like everyone had just walked away and forgotten to come back. Some of the places still had food on tables and lights turned on. Whatever had happened to the aliens had been very fast and very complete. Dr. Rachel Green had been studying alien history and culture for most of her life. She knew more about how aliens thought and lived than almost any other human. Her research had found clues about what they were calling the silence. It seemed to be some kind of living energy that could get inside alien brains and take control of them. The scary part was that it did not seem to work the same way on humans. Colonel Steve Martinez commanded the Space Marines who protected human colonies. He had fought alongside alien soldiers before and knew how strong and smart they were. If something could defeat armies that had ruled space for centuries, then he worried about what it might do to humans. Earth's weapons and ships were much weaker than what the aliens had been using, but Dr. Emma Watson had found something that gave everyone hope. She worked at the research station on the moon and spent her time studying how different brains worked. Her computer showed that human minds were built differently from alien ones. Where alien brains were organized and predictable, human brains were messy and chaotic. This might be why the silence could not control humans the same way it controlled aliens. Emma explained that most alien species thought in very logical ways. Their minds worked like computers with clear patterns that were easy to predict. But human minds were full of random thoughts, emotions, and contradictions. Humans could think about many different things at once and change their minds quickly. This chaos in human thinking might be what kept the silence from being able to take over human consciousness. Admiral Peter Kane had been commanding ships near the edge of human space when the alien world started going quiet. His crews had seen strange things moving through space that did not show up clearly on their sensors. The enemy seemed to be made of something that bent light and energy around it. His ships had tried to track it, but it moved in ways that did not follow normal physics. Peter told everyone that the silence was definitely heading toward human worlds, but it was moving slowly. His best guess was that it was trying to figure out why humans were different from the aliens it had already absorbed. Every time it got close to a human ship or colony, it would stop and seem to study them before moving on. This gave humanity some time to prepare, but probably not very much. The meeting went on for hours as people shared information and tried to make plans. Scientists talked about building new weapons that might work against an energy-based enemy. Military leaders discussed how to protect the most important human worlds and colonies. Politicians argued about whether to try to hide from the silence or fight against it directly. Finally, Helen stood up again and made the announcement that would define humanity's future. She declared that all human worlds would go to maximum defense, readiness. Every ship, every weapon, and every person would be prepared for war against an enemy unlike anything they had ever faced. But this was not just about human survival anymore. If they lost, The concept of free will and individual thought might disappear from the universe forever. The people in the room realized that humanity had become something they never expected to be. They were no longer the youngest and weakest species in the galaxy. They were the last hope for keeping alive the idea that thinking beings should be free to make their own choices. The weight of that responsibility was heavier than anything humans had ever carried before. As the meeting ended and people began to leave, Helen looked out the window at Earth's blue sky. Somewhere out there in the darkness of space, an ancient enemy was coming that had never failed to win before. But humans had something that all the advanced alien civilizations had apparently lacked. They had the stubborn refusal to give up, being themselves no matter what the cost might be. Whether that would be enough remained to be seen. Dr. Lucy Chen was working late in her laboratory when her computer started showing readings that made no sense. She was stationed at the research facility orbiting Proxima Centauri, far from Earth but close enough to monitor what the silence was doing. For months, the absorbed alien civilizations had been completely quiet. But now something was changing. Her instruments were detecting small bursts of activity from worlds that had been dead silent for half a year. Lucy called her supervisor and tried to explain what she was seeing. The energy patterns coming from alien worlds looked like electrical storms in the brains of sleeping people. It was as if the absorbed civilizations were having dreams or nightmares inside the collective consciousness of the silence. Something was disturbing the perfect peace that the entity had created when it absorbed billions of alien minds. The answer to what was happening came from an unexpected source. 8-year-old Bobby Henderson lived on the research station with his father, who was the base commander. Bobby was a normal kid who liked to play games and ask questions about everything. But lately, he had been having strange dreams that seemed too real to be just imagination. In his dreams, he could talk to the aliens who had been absorbed by the silence. Dr. Amanda Foster was the child psychologist who worked at the research station. Her job was to help the families who lived in space deal with the stress and isolation of being so far from Earth. When Bobby told her about his dreams, she thought they were just his way of dealing with the scary things happening in the galaxy. But the details he described were too accurate to be just a child's imagination. Bobby told Amanda that in his dreams, he could see vast cities full of different alien species. But they all looked sad and confused, like they had forgotten something important. The crystal people from Zephyr had lost their bright colors, and the warrior aliens from Karathi had forgotten how to fight. Everyone was peaceful and quiet, but they seemed empty inside, like robots pretending to be alive. The most amazing thing Bobby said was that the aliens were still themselves deep inside the collective consciousness. They had not been destroyed or replaced, but were just sleeping very deeply. In his dreams, some of them would recognize him and ask for help. They wanted to remember what it felt like to be individuals again, but they could not figure out how to wake up from the shared dream they were trapped in. Amanda realized that Bobby's young mind might be naturally resistant to the silence in ways that adult humans were not. Children's brains were still growing and changing, which might make them harder for the entity to fully understand or control. She contacted the Emergency Council on Earth and told them about Bobby's experiences with the absorbed aliens. The information from Bobby led to the most dangerous plan in human history. If the absorbed aliens were still conscious but trapped, then maybe human minds could serve as a wake-up call for them. Captain Gary Turner volunteered to try something that no human had ever attempted before. He would let the silence try to absorb him while staying connected to Earth through quantum communication equipment. The idea was that Gary's chaotic human consciousness could spread through the collective like a virus, disrupting the perfect unity that kept the aliens asleep. His human thoughts and emotions might remind the absorbed species what it felt like to be individuals. If the plan worked, it could free billions of trapped minds. If it failed, humanity would lose one of their best ship captains and probably learn nothing useful. Dr. Nathan Price was in charge of the technical side of the mission. He had to figure out how to keep Gary connected to Earth while he was being absorbed by an entity that existed partly outside normal space. The quantum communication system they built was completely experimental and might not work at all. There was no way to test it beforehand because no one had ever tried to talk to someone while they were being absorbed by the silence. Gary's ship approached the silence while every scientist and military leader on Earth watched the sensor readings. When the entity began its absorption process, something unprecedented happened. Instead of Gary's mind being dissolved into the collective consciousness, his chaotic human thoughts began spreading through the network like cracks in a perfect crystal. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Across the galaxy, worlds that had been silent for months suddenly came alive with confused radio chatter. The Veil Collective's ethereal voices returned to the quantum networks, sounding lost and disoriented but definitely individual again. Zephyrian cities began to flicker with their characteristic energy patterns. Karathi fleet captains started sending military status reports even though they were not sure why they were doing it. But the silence was not going to give up its perfect unity without a fight. The entity had spent millions of years creating what it believed was the ideal form of consciousness. Having that unity disrupted by chaotic human thoughts made it react with something that might have been anger if an energy being could feel emotions. The collective consciousness began to convulse as absorbed minds started to remember what it felt like to disagree with each other. Gary found himself at the center of a battle between individual consciousness and collective unity. His mind was the battlefield where millions of years of philosophical differences were being fought. He could feel the silence trying to smooth out his chaotic thoughts and make them fit into the peaceful collective. At the same time, he could sense the absorbed aliens using his human memories as a guide to remember their own individual identities. The quantum communication link let Earth monitor what was happening to Gary's consciousness. His brain patterns showed a constant struggle between remaining himself and being absorbed into something larger. Sometimes the readings looked almost normal, and other times they showed patterns that no human brain had ever produced before. The scientists watching knew they were witnessing the birth of a completely new form of consciousness. As more alien minds began to wake up inside the collective, the silence found itself dealing with something it had never experienced before: internal conflict. For millions of years, every consciousness it absorbed had eventually accepted the peace of unity. But the chaotic influence of human thought was teaching the absorbed aliens to question whether perfect peace was really better than individual freedom. Michelle Torres was patrolling the outer edge of human space when she saw something that no human had ever seen before. Her ship was small and fast, built for watching the borders and reporting back to Earth about any dangers. She had been a captain for 8 years and thought she had seen everything the universe could show her. But what appeared on her sensors that day was completely new and terrifying. The thing that came toward her ship was not solid like a normal spacecraft. It looked more like a ripple in space itself, bending the light from distant stars around. Michelle had read all the reports about the silence, but seeing it in person was very different from reading words on a screen. Her instruments could barely detect it, and her weapons targeting system could not lock onto something that seemed to be made of empty space. The silence moved in a way that hurt to watch. It flowed through space like water, but also seemed to exist in several places at once. Michelle felt a strange pressure in her head when it got close to her ship. It was like someone was gently knocking on the inside of her skull, trying to get in. But unlike the aliens who had been absorbed completely, she found that she could resist the pressure and keep her thoughts to herself. For the first time since it had started consuming civilizations across the galaxy, the silence stopped moving forward. Michelle watched in amazement as the entity that had destroyed ancient empires just sat there in space as if it was confused. Her radio crackled to life with reports from other human ships in the area. They were all seeing the same thing. The unstoppable force that had swept across the galaxy had met something it could not immediately overcome. Dr. Kevin Ross was monitoring the situation from his laboratory on Mars. His job was to study alien technology and biology, but now he was trying to understand something that seemed to be neither fully alive nor completely mechanical. The readings his instruments were getting made no sense according to normal science. The silence appeared to be some kind of conscious energy that could think and make decisions, but existed outside the laws of physics that humans understood. Kevin noticed that the silence was not trying to destroy human ships or colonies. Instead, it seemed to be attempting some kind of communication. The entity was sending out waves of energy that felt like thoughts being pressed directly into human minds. But unlike with the aliens, These mental messages did not take over human consciousness. Humans could hear the thoughts, but still remain themselves. Commander Sandra Mills volunteered to be the first human to try direct contact with the silence. She was brave and curious, and she believed that understanding the enemy was the key to defeating it. Her ship moved slowly toward the strange ripple in space while scientists on Earth monitored every sensor reading and brain scan they could get from her. The moment Sandra made contact changed everything humans thought they knew about their enemy. The silence did not speak in words or pictures, but in pure concepts that appeared directly in her mind. She felt emotions and memories that were not her own, but somehow she was able to separate them from her own thoughts. What she learned made her both amazed and horrified. The silence was older than any civilization humans had ever known about. It had existed since before the first aliens had learned to build tools or make fire. For millions of years it had watched species rise and fall, seeing them struggle with war, disease, and death. Eventually it had decided that all the suffering in the universe came from individual consciousness. If all minds could be joined together, there would be no more conflict or pain. Sandra realized that the silence genuinely believed it was helping the species it absorbed. To the ancient entity, taking away individual thought was not murder but salvation. It saw the chaos and conflict in separate minds as a disease that needed to be cured. Every alien species it had absorbed was now part of a perfect, peaceful collective, where no one ever disagreed or felt lonely. But humans were different in a way that confused and frustrated the silence. Human minds were so chaotic and contradictory that they could not be easily absorbed into the collective. Where alien thoughts were organized and logical, human thoughts jumped around randomly and often made no sense. The silence found that trying to absorb a human mind was like trying to hold water in a net. The entity began studying humanity more carefully, trying to understand how their minds worked. It watched human colonies and listened to human communications, learning about human culture and psychology. With each observation, it became more puzzled about why humans seemed to actually enjoy their chaotic and contradictory way of thinking. Lieutenant Colonel Danny Wright was in charge of analyzing all the information about the silence that human ships and scientists were gathering. His job was to figure out how to defeat an enemy that could not be shot or bombed in any normal way. The more he learned about the entity, the more worried he became about humanity's chances of survival. Danny's computers showed that the silence was learning from every interaction with humans. Each time it tried to absorb a human mind and failed, it gathered data about why the process had not worked. At the current rate of learning, the entity would probably find a way past human mental defenses within 6 months. Time was running out for humanity to find a solution. The worst part was that the silence was not evil in any way that humans could understand. It truly believed that joining all consciousness together was the best thing for every living being in the universe. The entity could not comprehend why humans would want to remain separate and individual when they could be part of something larger and more perfect. As reports came in from the front lines, it became clear that humanity was facing a philosophical war as much as a physical one. The question was not just whether humans could survive, but whether the very idea of individual consciousness deserved to survive. The silence offered peace, unity, and an end to all conflict. All it asked in return was for humans to give up the one thing that made them human, the right to be themselves. Gary Turner floated in a space that existed somewhere between individual thought and collective consciousness. His mind had become a bridge connecting billions of awakening alien intelligences with the chaotic freedom of human thinking. Through the quantum link with Earth, he could still communicate, but his words came through strange and dreamlike. He described seeing every species the silence had absorbed as they slowly remembered what it meant to be themselves again. The war that followed was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen before. There were no laser battles or exploding spaceships. Instead, the fight happened in the realm of pure thought, where ideas themselves became weapons. Human ships worked alongside newly awakened alien crews to rescue consciousness from the collective mind that had held them prisoner for months. Major Kelly Wright commanded the first joint mission with a Karathi fleet captain who had just remembered how to give orders to his own crew. The blue-skinned alien warriors were confused and disoriented after their long sleep in the collective consciousness. They remembered their military training and their loyalty to the Empire, but they had forgotten how to disagree with each other or make individual decisions. Kelly found herself in the strange position of teaching an advanced alien species how to have arguments again. The Karathi had been bred for thousands of years to be perfect soldiers who followed orders without question, but the silence had made them so peaceful and unified that they could no longer function as an effective fighting force. They needed to remember that sometimes conflict and disagreement were necessary for survival. Dr. Ben Parker was working around the clock to understand what the silence really was and why it had started absorbing other species in the first place. His research into the entity's origins revealed a tragic story that changed how humanity viewed their enemy. The silence had not always been a collective consciousness. Millions of years ago, it had been an individual species, just like any other. Ben's computers had finally decoded some of the deepest memories stored in the silence's collective mind. Long ago, there had been a race called the Eternal Ones, who lived on a planet near the center of the galaxy. They had been peaceful philosophers who spent their time thinking about the meaning of life and consciousness. But their sun was dying, and they faced extinction along with everything they had learned about existence. Faced with the end of their species, the Eternal Ones had made a desperate choice. Rather than let their consciousness die with their bodies, they had found a way to merge all their minds together into a single energy being that could survive without physical form. The process had worked, but it had also changed them in ways they had not expected. As a collective consciousness, they gradually lost the ability to understand why individual minds would want to remain separate. The silence genuinely believed that it was saving other species from the loneliness and conflict that came with individual consciousness. It could not understand why beings would choose to remain isolated in their own minds when they could be part of something larger and more perfect. From its perspective, absorption was not conquest, but rescue from the chaos of separate existence. This revelation led to the breakthrough that would save the galaxy. Dr. Kathy Johnson was a therapist who specialized in helping people with trauma and mental health problems. She realized that the silence was not evil, but was instead suffering from a kind of cosmic mental illness. Millions of years of collective existence had made it unable to remember the value of individual thought and choice. Working with volunteer psychologists from dozens of awakening alien species, Kathy began the most unusual therapy session in galactic history. Instead of trying to destroy the silence, they started teaching it how to coexist with individual consciousness, rather than absorbing it. The process was slow and difficult, because the entity had to unlearn millions of years of believing that unity was always better than separation. The absorbed aliens played a crucial role in healing the silence. As they regained their individual identities, they shared their memories of what it felt like to be part of the collective consciousness. Many of them admitted that there had been a kind of peace and unity that they would miss now that they were separate again. But they also remembered the joy of making their own choices and having their own thoughts. Gradually, the silence began to understand that both individual consciousness and collective unity had value. It started calling itself the Guardian and took on a new role as the protector of all forms of consciousness in the galaxy. Instead of absorbing species into itself, it began to help them develop their minds and explore new ways of thinking while remaining individuals. The process of rebuilding galactic civilization took years. Many species had forgotten how to run their own governments and make decisions without the guidance of the collective consciousness. Humans found themselves in the unexpected role of teachers, helping ancient civilizations remember how to function as individuals while still working together for common goals. President Helen Parker, now much older but still sharp in her thinking, gave a speech that would be remembered throughout galactic history. She spoke to representatives from hundreds of species who had gathered to form a new kind of galactic community. Instead of the rigid hierarchy that had existed before, the new alliance would be based on the principle that every consciousness had the right to remain individual while contributing to the greater good. Helen said that humanity had stood alone, not because they were the strongest or the smartest, but because they had been too stubborn to give up what made them human. Their refusal to surrender their chaotic and contradictory way of thinking had saved not just themselves, but the very concept of free will. The galaxy was no longer silent, but had learned to sing in harmony, while keeping each voice distinct and valuable. The Guardian, formerly known as the Silence, became the protector of consciousness in all its forms. It used its vast knowledge and power to help species explore new ways of thinking and being, while always respecting their right to remain individuals. The entity that had once threatened to absorb all consciousness in the galaxy became its greatest defender against any force that might try to eliminate diversity of thought. In the end, the day humanity stood alone became the day the galaxy learned that unity and individuality were not opposites, but could exist together in beautiful harmony. The universe was full of different voices, each contributing to a greater song of consciousness that would echo through the stars for millions of years to come.